So today's session, this is what we're going to look at. As I've said, I am recording the session, and if you can keep your microphones mute, you're probably all used to this by now. And we will be using breakout rooms. I'm not using apps for this one, but I will be using the chat function. So if you could just be aware of where that is, and if you want to contribute, it'll be fantastic to get your input, because the really important thing about the new curriculum for Wales, but also these sessions, is that you take from it what's useful for your setting and you make it your own. So nothing that I'm going to tell you today is going to be perfect for your setting, but I'm hoping you can pick and choose from all the different ideas I give you, and from that you can bring it together with what you're doing already in school and make it your own. So what we're going to do today, so the outline of this session, session 4, is looking at planning. And we're going to start with why we need to integrate the outdoors into your planning. So why can't we just do it whenever we like, and why is it important to have that integration? And that's, of course, really important in all of your teaching. Everything is useful when you plan it, but there are some unplanned opportunities with outdoor learning, probably more so than you get your indoor learning. So we'll mention that as well. I'm then going to go through a whole load of ideas of how to integrate outdoor learning into your planning. So I'm going to look at some examples of doing it into your long-term planning. So how to choose your topics, try to embed some outdoor learning into your topic choices. Then we're going to look at some medium-term planning, ways in which you can identify locations for activities and use the outdoors as inspiration for your activities. And then some short-term planning, looking at whole day sessions outdoors. How do you make that relevant? How do you embed that? But also, how do you make these little short sessions, these little adaptability points where you might go out just for a small activity, and how do you integrate those as well? For each of those planning methods, I'm going to say what's good about it, but also the negative points. And hopefully from that, you will be able to adapt it and pick and choose and integrate it with your planning method, so that you can then bring it together as a unique way that you plan. And then I'm going to go through, because when I was writing this, I suddenly realized you could take this two ways. It could be how to plan a session. It could be how to embed it in all of your planning. So I thought, oh, people might want to know how to plan an outdoor session. So we're going to go through that, and I've got a lesson plan outline that I've created for outdoor learning lesson that you can use if you want, and that's going to hopefully help you with that. So that's the aim of today. So we're going to start with why we integrate outdoor learning into your planning, and why should you bother? Now, of course, planning is what teachers do, okay? That is basically your superpower. You are fantastic at planning, and you spend an awful lot of time planning. So if you're trying to have outdoor learning as one of your pedagogies, you need to make sure that you've planned this and you've integrated it into your planning. So last week, one of the big barriers that was identified was time. And of course, if your outdoor learning is not planning that you're covering curriculum content, then going outside is going to be a waste of your time. So if you're using your planning effectively by getting your outdoor learning opportunities to cover curriculum content by looking at the activities and thinking, what can I teach outside through for this topic, then you know that when you go outside to do that activity, you are covering content. You're not just either staying in the same place for your children, you're bringing your children on, or you have worked out the learning objectives, which is key to your progression for your students or your learners. You also, if you plan your outdoor learning, you can make sure that you're using the outdoors to bring the curriculum to life. So again, it's not like a bolt on, oh, quick, we haven't been outside for ages, let's just go outside. You're trying to find the relevance to the indoor teaching in the real world, which is what the outdoors actually is. So you're bringing, hopefully, concepts which might be quite abstract, quite difficult to understand inside, to life when you come outside. And so, see, this is where you need that information. This is where this information is useful. You can also start to make learning links to complement your indoor learning. And unfortunately, I find this an awful lot, if you plan to go outside and you are not aware of the background of what's going on in school or what you've been teaching, and you don't know their prior knowledge, then what's going on outside is there's the disparate situation there. So what you're going to do outside is not going to build on the learning that's been taking place inside. So it's really important to complement the indoor learning, or build on it, or test it, or exemplify outdoor real life experiences, anything that's going to help make the outdoor experience complement the indoor experience. It also provides this relevance and a depth. Just changing locations can add, well, some difficulty, it can make it more challenging, but you're also making it clear that you can actually learn in more places than just inside the classroom. And hopefully you're making these topics and these opportunities that you're teaching in class much more relevant, because it's sometimes difficult to actually achieve that inside. Thinking about the real life examples of mathematical concepts or scientific concepts when you're in this quite static environment. When you go outside, you can see it in action, and it makes it much more relevant. Also, it's been seen that positive educational impacts are especially strong when outdoor activities are integrated or an integral part of your structured curriculum. So if you want your impact to be great, then you need to make sure that you've integrated it into your in-store learning as well. So the two flow together, they complement each other and they build on each other. And then last of all, we can use it as a tool to achieve your existing school priorities. So our next session is all about that whole school approach. But if your school priorities, some of them are quite tricky for you to actually learn or teach in your classroom, such as resilience, and bringing things to life, going outdoors is going to really help with achieving some of those values and some of those visions. Now, this quote is from Ofsted, so not Iestyn, and it is quite old now, but it just identifies that Ofsted and Iestyn do actually think about the outdoor learning in terms of curriculum. So if you are thinking about, well, this is all great, this is all building on our experience for our learners, but when Iestyn come along, are they really going to look at this? They are actually going to be looking at the impact, and the impact is only going to be assessed really if you're integrating this outdoor learning into your curriculum planning. So if you go on an outdoor learning experience and you do an activity and it's really impactful, but then you come in and you almost ignore what you've learned out there and you don't build from it or learn from it or use that experience to carry the learners on, then you're not making the best use of it, and therefore you won't have the maximum impact. So Iestyn will be looking for this impact, and that's going to be really obvious in what your students are probably saying, because outdoor learning is something that you remember. So if you're talking to learners and you ask them what they did, they'll probably tell you about the outdoor learning experiences because they're very memorable. But if that doesn't equate to anything in their books or anything that you then built on in your school, in your in-class teaching, then you can't see that actually was impactful beyond just them enjoying it. So making sure that you plan the post outdoor activity that builds on the outdoor activity and making a pre-outdoor activity that then you're going to build on when you go out, all brings this thing together so you make sure the impact is the greatest. So learning outside the classroom is not something you should do in addition to your curriculum, but it should be something that is integral. And the way to do that is to make it regular and being part of your teaching and learning. And to make sure that this actually happens, you really need to build it into your development of your schemes of work or your curriculum planning, and at every stage. So whenever you're thinking about what should we do next, what activities, where are we moving the learners on, you should be trying to integrate it at all levels. And that way you will have that impact that is expected of us. So in the context of outdoor learning, so today, we are going to be focusing in on curriculum linked outdoor learning in your school grounds or your local area. But of course, that's not the only outdoor learning that you could do or you should do with your learners. You should really try and extend this, if you are doing it, into your yearly planning or your termly planning for other opportunities for outdoor learning. So for a school as well, of course, school visits, field trips, outings, residentials. So again, if those are done in isolation, you are not going to get the maximum benefit from those opportunities. So it's really important to bring those into the planning stages as well, but we're not going to be covering those in this session. We're going to be focusing on just outdoor learning opportunities. So I'm going to go through now how to integrate outdoor learning into your planning. And we're going to start with just some generic ideas, some ways in which to get you thinking about how you're going to do this. So there's some key questions that if you ask them when you are doing your planning, it will really help you to consider the outdoors as you are doing your planning. And really a lot of this is just about prompting you to think about the outdoors when you're undertaking your planning. So the first question is which experience will have more impact on learners if they're done outside? So you're identifying the value of the outdoors in the activity that you're doing. So if you are doing your planning and you find out that the value of doing it outdoors is negative, it will make it worse, it will make it harder, and that is not the value, the learning objective, then you don't do it outdoors. If, however, taking this experience outdoors is really going to improve or increase the impact, then it makes sense to take it outdoors. Also ask yourselves, how can learning outdoors enhance and deepen the learning within the curriculum areas? Is there things outside that you can really use to exemplify what you were talking about inside, or to test their understanding or deepening their understanding of the curriculum areas that you're doing inside? Which experience are best suited to a combination of indoor and outdoor learning? Don't think that if you're undertaking embedded outdoor learning in your planning, it means that you must go out for a whole day or the whole afternoon, or you must have it every single Wednesday afternoon. What is much more meaningful and much better is to have this combination of indoor and outdoor, and you're going outdoors when it is the best time to go outdoors, to help to improve the learning and the impact, and it actually is going to add to the experience. So that might be literally you're doing an investigation, a science investigation, and you need to just go out and collect your data. So you're planning it inside, and then you go out, you collect your data, you bring that in, and you do your data analysis inside. So you're using the outdoors for collecting the data, and that is the most relevant part to that investigation. It could be that at the beginning of a topic, you go outside. So you're going to do some writing, some creative writing. You're going outside to provide them with inspiration, to collect metaphors or to collect adjectives or something. So you take them out, give them that inspirational moment, bring them back in to do the writing, because if you go outside and you're writing and the wind's blowing, it's going to make it harder. So that combination of indoor and outdoor, small snippets of using the outdoors is really useful. And if you build on those things that we talked about in starting out, training your students so that they know how to get outside very quickly and effectively and efficiently, then going out for short sessions is not going to be difficult. Thinking about how can learning indoors best be consolidated, progressed or enhanced using the outdoors. This is really key to the AOLE part of the AOLEs. So this experience part, so bringing it to life. So you've taught them an abstract topic inside, and then you take them outside to show them what that really means in real life. But also thinking about progression. Sometimes just taking an activity outside makes it more difficult. Things of working together as groups, communication, those are things that you can build on by taking it outside. But you also might want to take aspects outside because means that they can use the natural resources or the natural landscape around outside, which makes something more difficult or more challenging. It also might enhance the use of the using the outdoors, because you've got this amazing backdrop which is inspirational and provides you with opportunities to point things out. And then lastly, think about what opportunities exist outside for linking learning across the curriculum. Because although we've got our 6 AOLEs, the 4 purposes means that we are thinking about cross-curricular linking all the time. And of course, the real world does not live in isolation across different topics. It's completely integrated as one. So therefore you go outside and immediately you can't teach just maths or just science. You must teach cross-curricular. What's really important, which isn't down here though, is what you should try and think of in just kind of on the shelf. So if you need some activities that are almost like spontaneously pre-planned, so that are maybe a bit weather dependent. And so you might think, right, when I'm doing my planning, I want to do this activity. I can't really put it in at one location or one time, because it really depends on the circumstances, whether they've got this concept or whether the weather is right or whether the timing is right. So I'll just plan that, but I'll just keep it on the side. And then when it's suitable and favorable, we'll go out and do that activity. So these spontaneous pre-planned activities are really useful to have in a little box as well. So when we think about going outdoors, the most important thing to think about is your learning objectives. And can you deliver your learning objectives in that outdoor environment? And these are just some ways in which some learning objectives will be achieved through using the outdoors. And again, as I said, this is not out for the whole day. This could be just literally going out for a 5-minute session. So one really useful way of training your students, but also inspiring them to understand the use of the outdoors as a learning environment, is to take them outside for an inspiration or a starting point walk or something like that. So you're taking them out and you're getting them to find out what's in the outdoors that can help them to do the activity that you're then going to do inside. So you could take an inspirational walk by looking at, as I said, looking at literacy. Can you find adjectives? Can you find the location for the story that you're going to write? So a starting point to your lesson could just be a little inspirational walk. You could take a lesson that you were going to do inside, outside. Now, I know I've said in the past that this learning outdoors is not really outdoor learning, but stay with me. What I'm saying is complete the lesson outside rather than in the classroom when it will add to the experience. So for example, if you're doing drawing, if you're going to draw something, but you're going outside and you're going to use the nature or the outdoors as your inspiration or as your subject for the drawing, then that will add to the activity, that will add to the impact. You could also undertake a science investigation outside, because of course you can be much more messy there, you can have more space, but you can also think about the variables that will change when you're undertaking it outside. Can you control those variables? So you're looking at the scientific process and how you need to control variables. Going outside makes that tricky sometimes. Undertaking technology projects, you can use the space or structures or utilize different levels that you've got outside, which might be trickier inside. And this picture here on this slide is a picture of an activity which I could have done in the hall. This activity is called Build a Tree, and the people here, these children, are actually being parts of the tree. So we've got you can see the roots at the bottom, and you've got some bark around the outside. Now, we could have done this in the hall, but much more meaningful building a tree outside when you are surrounded by trees. And it also allowed me to point out the bark on the trees that were surrounding them, telling them about the roots, showing them where the roots were spreading underneath their feet, tell them all about the xylem sucking up the water to the top of the trees, showing them the height of the trees. And it made it much more meaningful being surrounded by those trees that they were trying to create themselves out of their bodies. Another very simple activity, but can be really useful and meaningful, is to use natural materials to deliver the learning. So for maths, if you collect some loose parts, bring them in, use them for if you're doing algebra. So if those can be your boxes or your X's. You can also find things that you can use as a subject or as part of a story. You might be able to experiment with the weather. So if you've got a story and it's got a certain landscape behind it, you could go outside and read the story there and use that landscape as a backdrop. So just using that to make more impact out of things that you're doing inside can be a really simple way of using the outdoors. I think a very high level and a really sophisticated use of outdoor learning, though, is to test understanding of concepts that you did inside by taking it outside. So you've done measuring, they've measured their pencil case, they've measured everything in the classroom. Taking them outside, you can now measure on a big scale, but also you can make it much more meaningful. So you can give them challenges. So they have to measure something because we're going to replace the roof of the school. So we need them to measure the size of the school. You also can get them to collect real data for graphing. So you're not just creating graphs from data you've given them. You get them to collect the data and then you actually build the graphs based on the data they have collected. It's also proper science as well, because you're collecting data with all its flaws and all its errors, and you don't get these perfect relationships. You've got much more to talk about when you're analyzing a graph which isn't perfect compared to one which gives you exactly what you expected. There's not a lot to talk about there. You can also look at following instructional writing. So if you're creating a trail using instructional writing, then your instructional writing can be tested by going outside and following it and seeing whether it actually gets to where you want to be. You can do large scale models. There's a really big push in the science and technology AOLE on modeling systems. So large scale areas or being outside, you can do your circulatory system and you're getting them to move, but also you can literally show them the difference between photosynthesis and respiration, because you're out there seeing things which are respiring and things that are photosynthesizing. You can look at growing patterns in the plants that are around you, looking at animals and their habitats and adaptation, things that you go through in class, looking at things like ice bears and things like that, but coming outside and seeing it relevant to theirs is much more meaningful. And then lastly, again, quite a high level thing is to exemplify concepts that you have learnt or taught inside. So if you've taught about identifying landforms or identifying geographical processes, very abstract, apart from pictures on the screen or some photos or some images, if you take it outside, you can look at the landscape around you and see if you could exemplify any of these processes and concepts that you've looked at inside. Really obvious way of doing that is talking about grid references. You then come outside, you've got a map with grid references of your school grounds. You can then show them, they can actually find locations and you can test their understanding of grid references. You can also test their understanding of the scientific process by coming outside and undertaking a science investigation, the design process by designing something, predicting where plants might grow depending on different attributes and different factors, something you might have done in theory inside, you come out and test that theory. You can challenge them with looking at maths formulas by coming out and measuring the age of trees by giving them a formula. They then actually do the practical application of that. And it makes it more meaningful because they understand, oh, that's why we've been taught that maths. I can see the use of it now. So I'm now going to go through ways in which you can embed outdoor learning into your long-term, medium-term, weekly and daily planning. But before we look at some of those ways of embedding outdoors into your planning, I just want to find out from you at the moment, how do you choose your topics? So your long-term planning, how do you come up with that? So I'm going to be quiet for a minute and have a drink. So if you could put in the chat any ways in which you actually use planning for long-term planning. So is there any inspiration you use for your topics, for choosing your topics? Okay, so we've got some coming through now. Thank you. So if anyone else wants to add the ways in which they choose their topics, a lot about student voice, pupil voice, staff consensus. Yeah, asking them what they want to do. Yeah, launch day. Yeah, so what I'm thinking at here is, if you look at the slide, there is a whole load of topic ideas here. And I just wonder, especially with the curriculum being so open now, especially with things like what age of part of history you're going to cover, how do you possibly choose out of all the potential things that you could cover? How do you come up with those ideas? Because I think it is a huge, you can do everything, and so many schools are taking different ways in doing it. So we've got whole school topics, and then the children ask what way they're going to go. Oh yeah, we focus, there's quite a lot coming on a certain AOLE. So you've got the AOLE, you choose that, and then the school, and maybe the learners actually develop from there which way they want to go to come up with a topic. I also wonder whether anybody actually doesn't do topics, or whether you're just stuck on your AOLE and just go with it and see what the students are interested in, and then just follow that without any specific topic. What we're going to do is, because long-term planning and your topics is something you do as a school, it's not something that I tend to do, because I teach individual classes and I teach them outdoors. So thinking about how I would go about in making sure that the outdoors was integrated into my long-term planning, what I would try and do is to make sure when I'm doing my long-term planning, I would think about my local environment and think, is there any way that I could use that to inspire and teach the topics that are relevant to it? Now, obviously, you might think, well, that's going to restrict what I'm teaching, because of course, there's only so much I can teach in my area, especially if you haven't got a lot of interest there. But it does provide you with a starting point at this point. And a lot of people are choosing some very abstract and very different topics now, because you have got so much more freedom with the new curriculum, that kind of anything is game, really, as long as you can find the 4 purposes in it and your AOLE content as well. So in order for you to do that, you do really need to have a really good understanding of your local area. And of course, if you're using that to choose your topics, you need to consider more than what you actually see from your school and maybe just your school grounds. So you're looking about your local learning area. But I would really suggest, a really useful thing I would think I would do was to talk to somebody who maybe is a local historian or is a local expert in some way, especially if you don't live in your local area, you don't know about your local area or your learners' local area. And then if you can't find local experts to talk to, then there are lots of resources online you can look at to see how your school space has changed. So thinking about old maps. Now, this is an old map of Nelston School. Nelston School is not where it says school now, that's where the old school is. But the school grounds is this boundary fence here that goes all the way down to the track. And if you have a look, there's actually the remains of a church in the grounds there. Who knew that? And things like that can be just a really good starting point to a topic that you might want to explore. Now, it could be just as simple as saying my school as your topic, or it could be something associated with that that you could then integrate into your planning. This is a really fantastic example. This school here, Warwick School Foundation, was actually a site for a school relocation project. And this is a school in Warwick, and they were relocating their school to this site until they found a Roman villa, which was actually the biggest Roman villa in the UK. Now, they did actually carry on with the build, and they are planning to preserve the site underneath the school campus. So it just shows that you never really know what might be hiding under your school or within your school grounds. So what I'm thinking of is Time Team Schools Edition. Now, please don't just dig up the whole of your school grounds, but imagine if you could find some pottery or something and have a little archaeological dig in your school grounds, even if it is a bit, put there, but you can find the history within the school grounds, and you're bringing history to life then as well. It's also the geography as well. I went to a school the other day, I was doing some training for them, and they were not sure what to do for their next topic, and they were thinking of the normal things. And I was telling them about their local area, and we were talking about where they go. And they said, oh, yeah, there's this huge embankment thing down there. And somebody said, oh, yeah, that's because of the glaciers. And I'm like, there you go. That's your next topic. So they're looking at glaciation because where they walk for their local, where they go to their woodland area, there is a moraine, which is created by a glacier. So no other school is probably going to be doing that topic, but it's relevant to their learners because their learners know about that area. So giving that inspiration from your local area is really important to make it meaningful, these projects or these topics that you're choosing. Also, when you're picking your topics, think about the time of year that you're going to be doing it, including the weather conditions, because it's then so tempting to not go outdoors because it's a lot easier inside because it's horrible, wet and cold out there. But if you are undertaking habitats and you stick to the summer, Obviously, that makes perfect sense. Olympics tend to be in the summer because that's when they're on in the telly. When you do rivers, they tend to do them in the autumn. Seasons, schools tend to do that in the autumn. So if you think about if the topics are going to be hindered by the time of year when you chose them, I did have a school that were doing habitats in winter. Winter is a really bad time to go out into nature if you're looking for mini beasts or if you're looking for plants, okay? Because it's gone dormant for the winter, you're going to find hardly anything, and it's going to be really difficult to find out, like, why is nature special when it is actually asleep at that time of year. So a really good way of doing that is to think about the celebrations you have through the year. So the celebrations through the year are usually associated with the seasonality, and they will give you a nice anchor to some of your topics and provide you with an appropriate outdoor activity or an outdoor session, because that was what was happening in those activities in the past. That's what they were based on. Also, thinking about things like growing cycles. If you're doing growing, you need to make sure that it's the right time of year for you to be planting seeds in your allotment and for you to be looking at the plants growing. Also think about farming. If you're going on a farm visit, it's going to be much more interesting in some times of the year. Also considering what happens in the natural cycles in the environment. So we've got these seasonal variations. So life cycles, brilliant in a pond in May, really rubbish in January or December in a pond, unless you find some frog spawn. Looking at a meadow or a woodland, obviously the woodlands, deciduous woodlands, very different than in the springtime. So consider what is relevant. And if you're doing an activity or even just a book or something that's associated with a climate from a different part of the world, then try and study it at a time of the year which has got a similar climate to where you're going to talk about. So if you're talking about Africa, do that in the summer. You're talking about the Arctic, do that in the winter. And then you can use that outdoors to either model or to think about the conditions in those environments. Now, a powerful case has been presented through a lot of research that learning outside should be frequent, continuous, and progressive. So they should not, and they really mustn't just be left to the summer months, or you cancel them because the weather is not in your favor, or because you've got an inspection, so you're not going to go outside. So it really, if you're going to have this continuous outdoor learning, this frequent one, and you're making sure it's progressive in your planning, you're going to have the greatest impact. And you know that your learners will become really good outdoor learners because they are skilled in going outside. They're very efficient at actually getting ready. And you know that it's going to be integrating into their indoor learning because they're so used to that outside and inside learning. That's their place where they learn as well as inside. So a balance between indoor and outdoor learning can be achieved when you're planning this whole curriculum around something specific. So it could be like a visit. So if you're doing a visit, then that could be the crux of your topic or your topic launch. And then you know that you can draw from that and integrate it into your outdoor learning. Here are a few topic ideas that I've just picked up. So these are all based on the Welsh curriculum that a lot of schools have been doing. So you can take many of these you like, but it just shows the huge variety of topics that are now being used, much more than there ever was in the past. And I know some schools are not even going down the topic route, but they're using the 4 purposes, as some people have said, and they're looking at what their learners want to learn as their drivers, and that's it. And then it still doesn't mean that you can't integrate that outdoor learning into the topics as well, because even though they're going to have their input, really it's great to then use the outdoors as a driver to pick the activities that they want to do, because there's going to be a huge number. Choose the ones that are appropriate to the time of year and say, right, we'll do those later on in the year because that's be better at that time of the year. So you can still use the outdoors as a driver. So a very simple way to include consideration of the outdoors when you're topic planning is to just do your planning outdoors. So when you have your planning meeting with your staff, just sit on a bench outdoors and do it. Or if you're getting your input from your learners, then do it outside, sit on a bench, because really you do get inspiration from whatever is surrounding you. So once you've chosen your topic, we're now going to move on to the medium term planning. And some of you have already mentioned this in the chat, but a really great way of introducing and setting the scene for using outdoor learning in your planning is by using it in your launch days or your experience days or your immersive days or your topic launches or whatever you call it, which inspire your pupils to input into the start of your topic. So again, if you can consider how the outdoors can be used to immerse your learners in the experience and expose them to the real aspects of the topic by having this experience day. So for example, you go on a field trip to a place which is associated with your topic. Could be, doesn't have to be outdoors, just because you're outside of your school, it's still outdoor learning. So you could take them to a museum, you could take them to a woodland, or you can take them to the beach. And then what you're trying to do is just whet their appetite and get them asking questions. The aim of a launch day is not to answer questions. It's just to get your learners engaged in the topic and get them to think about the questions they want to ask. And of course, if you do that outdoors, they're probably more likely to need to answer them by going outdoors as well. So if I just give you an example, this is a launch day that I planned for a school. So I plan launch days. And if you have a look at these activities, this was a AOLE, Science and Technology AOLE focus on forces, and they called it May the Force Be With You. But the important thing I want you to see from this is the second thing I came up with, apart from the activities, the first thing I said was what we're going to do. The second thing was I needed to know was where we are going to do it. And that's always been my go-to, because the activity is something that's going to teach, that's going to provide the learning objective, but the where it happens will also change that learning objective slightly and provide a different aspect of how this is going to work. And sometimes it is more easy to do outside, more meaningful outside. Sometimes inside is the place to go, but it's really important to have that conversation. So if your launch day is, or your starter experience has some outdoor element, then it will show your learners that the outdoors is a place where you can learn and you can discover. And it also prompts them to consider alternative locations for their ongoing learning. So their questions that they might ask might be really relevant to actually try and find the answer outside. And it also provides them with inspiration from all the different environments you've got, not just one, to ask their questions. So you might get even more variety of questions to ask. Now, if you think about it, if you ask a student or a learner a question and they're really thinking about it, how often do they look around for inspiration? And although your walls are fantastic in your classrooms to provide them with inspiration, if you go outside and ask them that question and they're looking around for inspiration, it's actually going to give them different inspiration for questions. So I would suggest you at least do some of that pupil voice, asking what they want to learn in an outdoor environment, to prompt them to think about more than just the in-classroom as a location for working. So examples of launch experiences that you could visit your local park or a beach, a woodland, riverside, museum. But of course, all of these in this launch day were all taking place in the school grounds. And if you don't have brilliant school grounds, then consider just doing your launch day in a local open space, walkable from the school grounds. So you are using some outdoor space. You've got more room as well. So once you've undertaken your topic launch, you need to continue to promote the use of the outdoors when you're doing your epic planning. So if you do your planning, which I think people have said in the chat as well, that epic planning, everybody planning in class. So sorry, I'm just saying, Dawn, did the school have the kit for all of this? Oh, right, no, I provided all the equipment for the launch day. Sorry, I ran it. But the teachers ran most of them. So I ran the moving water and the simple machines, but all the rest of it was all run by the school. So what I did is I provided 20 activities in the end, each one with a bag, brought them to the school, did 2 of them, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. All the other activities were run by the staff. So I provided them with outlines of how to run it. So once you've undertaken when you've got your epic planning going on inside, again, think about how you could bring the outdoors into that. So it could be, you could do your epic planning outside, fantastic. Or maybe send a small group outside to do a bit of planning there and then feed back to the rest of the class to see if there was anything that they got inspiration from outside. Or you could just prompt them. So a great way of prompting them is to just say, so where do you think the best place would be to answer that question? And then they're thinking about where they could go for this as well. You could show them photos. If you don't want to take them out, you could show photos of potential learning places, learning locations that you could visit. And these will give them ideas. Or Google Earth on the big screen so they can have a look and say, oh, I've got this idea. Where could we go to find the answer to that? Obviously, you're restricted by how far the bus will take you, but it will give them that prompt to think about learning locations. You could also bring in materials or loose parts that relate to different environments. So bring in some sand to represent the beach, bring in gravel or shells, and then these represent different outdoor areas. So again, gives them a bit of a prompt to think about the outdoors in their planning as well. Once you've got your input from all of your learners and also from your teachers, and you've got your epic planning, also think about some outdoor projects. So if you're building outdoor projects into this, they may require some development and some planning. So it might be an ongoing thing that you've got. For example, so if you're going to be building an allotment, it's going to take more than just this topic to do that. So don't forget to bring them in for the next topic as well, and make sure you're using that as well. Now, again, for identifying locations for activities, this is a useful tool. It's by the OEAP. Now, it's not specifically for the Welsh curriculum, but it's still, I think, relevant because it provides you with ideas of what you can teach outdoors. So if you're struggling, really struggling for potential learning opportunities outdoors, then this document just gives you some ideas that you can use, some places you can go to find some inspiration or to teach some of those things. So if you are really struggling to start with, this is quite a nice tool here. But what I see is the key to integrating outdoor learning into your planning is to provide a prompt in your planning. So in whatever planning framework you use, some prompt there that gets you to consider where is the best place to undertake this activity. So when you plan, ask yourself this question: where are the best places for outdoor learning activities to deliver this intended learning outcome? So where am I going to do this? And if the answer is in the classroom, fine. If the answer is, oh, this is going to be better outside in the woodland, then put that into your planning. So what I'm going to do now is going to run through a few ideas to help you adapt your medium-term planning tools or your frameworks that you use to prompt you to embed outdoor learning into whatever planning tool you use. Now, these ideas that I'm going to go through are in order of how embedded and how much you prioritize the outdoor learning. There's not an order of the best or the worst. And they're ranked in terms of how much you will have to change your planning process to embed a level of outdoor learning in your planning. But if you feel that you're already doing quite a bit of outdoor learning and you want to up a level, then there are ideas for more advanced systems, which may be very different from what you use now. And they'll also provide you with an opportunity to maximize the use of outdoor learning and aim for a majority or equality in outdoor and indoor learning. But really importantly, do not reinvent your planning process so that you can undertake outdoor learning. You need to adapt what you're using at the moment. So what I want you to do is to take from each of these, whatever fits into your school and your planning process at the moment, and your level of confidence in outdoor learning. So one system might not fit you, but an adaptation of a few relating to what you use at the moment, hopefully will provide you with an idea. So we're going to start with this one. This is probably the easiest thing you could do. And this is just highlighting on your planning sheet what activities are going to happen outside. So you do your planning as normal, and then at the end, you just highlight which ones are going to take place outdoors. The good things about this is it's really easy to add it to any planning process at all. It does highlight your outdoor learning, obviously, literally, and then you can use it to, and you may actually use this already in your systems for identifying things like DCF or literacy. So you may have leads who are using this and highlighting your plans in this way already. So it might be something familiar to you. It also means that your outdoor learning is definitely embedded in your curriculum content, because you've done the curriculum planning first and then you've identified the outdoor learning. So it's all going to be linked to your curriculum planning. The negatives about this is that it could be done as a bit of lip service to taking things outside. So you're looking at it and you highlighted nothing. So you're like, oh, we'll do that outside. And so you highlight that bit. It also doesn't necessarily mean that you're making the best use of the resources found outside by just looking to move the learning to the outside. So if you're not using the outdoors as a prompt, you're just saying, oh, we've done all this planning, right, what could we do outside? So you're kind of missing a trick of using the resource for the planning stage. A second idea is to actually add a box into your planning, which has outdoor learning on it. Okay, so we've just got a box here, and then you fill that in as you're undertaking your planning. So this is another one here. So we've got outdoor opportunities, we've got all our AOLEs, and then we've got one for outdoor opportunities. Now, this could also be used for foundation phase for looking at the location of things like your continuous provision. So this is a foundation phase one. So we've got a mud kitchen, we've got construction water tray. So we've got actual locations in our outdoor area that we then identify in our planning. You could also just add location in your planning form, which has got skills, outdoor learning skills. This is a bit restrictive because, to be honest, there's not a lot of outdoor learning skills associated with all of the AOLEs. It's mainly the geography aspects. So it does restrict you. Doesn't cover as much as you really could. Now, the good things about these is that when the planning takes place, that outdoor learning box is a prompt to encourage the consideration of the outdoor learning as a location for teaching. So as you're doing your planning, it's always there and you're thinking, oh, can I put that in there? Oh, would that be best in there? So it's a nice little prompt there. However, there are some negatives, and I'm using this example from a school to show you the negatives. So if you have that box, it could mean that you're not actually embedding the outdoor learning activities. They can be standalone. And if you have a look at this planning sheet here, there is an awful lot of detail here about this World War II topic, so much information. This isn't from a Welsh school, I must say, it's an English school, but there's so much information on that. On the second sheet, which is a major flaw, we have this learning outdoors box, which is kind of tucked at the end, so easily ignored. And if you look at what's actually been put in that box, it says visits to the museum and forest school. And unfortunately, a lot of schools have this box in their planning and they just put forest school in it and think, right, I'll put that in every term and then I've covered outdoor learning. That's not embedding it. You're just saying, this is something we do all the time, so we're covering it. So if this was mine and I go back to this planning sheet here, I would actually have been able to take from here and thinking, right, what can we grab from this and put it in that box, which is really meaningful and embedded. So we could build an air raid shelter in the yard. We could practice air raids. We could do some dig for victory in our allotment. We could do some foraging for wild food. We could make some rush lights. We can look at what the school grounds was like in World War II, etc. So much has been missed from that to fit into that outdoor learning box. So that is one of the big problems with it. Another plan or another way of doing it is to actually create an outdoor learning activity plan. So this is alongside the curriculum planning framework that you've identified. But the good thing about this plan, as opposed to just coming up with a whole new outdoor learning plan or framework, is that this identifies where you are using the school grounds, the routine outdoor learning, your complex visits, so that's your going outside the school grounds on a bus, and then your residentials. So from this, you can actually identify as a whole how much outdoor learning you are doing. And this could be for a whole year. It doesn't have to be necessarily for a topic. So it does provide you with a framework for identifying what's taking place regularly. And if these are small activities, then that's okay. It does ensure that the outdoors is truly considered in part of delivering the curriculum, because you get this overview. However, again, it can still be done in isolation because it's not truly embedded into the curriculum teaching, because it's seen in isolation, because it's a different document. So I wouldn't recommend you do it separately, because you would not embed it because it is a separate document. But if there's a way of integrating this into your planning, then that might be a really good thing. Again, it's also slightly different for foundation phase. So foundation phase, this is an outdoor planning sheet for the continuous provision for outdoor planning. Again, that might be more relevant because you know you've got these continuous areas outside. So the outdoor planning is slightly different in foundation phase, so it might be more relevant to have it on a separate sheet. A better method that I think will prompt you about using your location and definitely embedding it, again, slight tweak to your planning, is just to add a column that says location next to the activities that you're going to undertake. So you undertake all your planning, and every time you write something down as an activity, you then identify the location where you will undertake it. You could also use some kind of system of signposting. So you could put a tree next to your, so if you don't want a column, you can just put some kind of signposting to show where you want to do these activities. So again, it's a prompt. The signposting, you need to put a legend or a key somewhere, so to prompt you to say, right, where am I putting this? Where should we do this? Where's the best place to undertake this? And then putting those icons on. Now, the positive is that it's prompts. So it is asking you, where would you place, where's the best place to undertake this activity? Having that there as a prompt. So you will make the best use of your outdoor space. But the negative is you may try to place a planned activity, not necessarily looking at the best use of the outdoors for learning, but just saying, oh, I haven't got many trees on this. I need to put some more trees in. So you're taking things out. You're not thinking, oh, right, let's have a look at the outdoors. How can I use that to the best? We're now getting into some very different ways of planning, which might be very different from what you do or what you have ever done. But again, don't think you now need to go the whole hog. You can just take what you like. So this form of planning is planning on a map. So you print out a map of your school grounds, your local learning area, and you look for locations to teach the curriculum content you want to cover and where the skills can be tested and gained. The good thing about this, of course, is that you are looking at outdoors as a resource to teach. So it helps you identify the balance of indoor and outdoor activities. Because if you do this and you've just got every arrow pointing to your classroom, you realize you're not using your outdoors much. You also means that you can use a variety of locations, and you're looking at the space as a prompt to be specific about the activity you want to have in which place. So it's much more meaningful. And it means the space is providing the inspiration. Negative, of course, is you probably might have to adapt this in terms of the weather. So if you've identified a location outside and it's a perfect location for an activity, but it's not the right location because the rain is coming in on that angle for that location, then you do have to be a bit more adaptable than sticking to that one place. Also, if you've got a lot of other people in your school using those locations, then you might clash as well. And then you may not have a brilliant outdoor learning area. So you may not have the option to have different locations to do your learning in. Now, as I said, you don't have to go all out for this, but an easy way of doing this, instead of going all out for the map, is to just have this map next to you when you are doing your planning. So when you're doing your planning, just look over and say, well, where should we have this? Okay, that would be best there. And then put that into your planning. So you're not writing it actually on the map. You're just using it as a reference to build in those ideas into your planning. So this is another one. This is for an outdoor learning session, again, foundation phase, but more detail, identifying the places you would actually undertake specifics. So this is getting really into the crux of where would I do this certain outdoor skill. Again, better for foundation phase, these ones. The next activity, the next method of planning is what I do. This is how I plan. Now, because I teach outdoors and I only teach outdoors, I don't ever think about inside, apart from what students have done before they come and what they're going to do afterwards. So what I want to do is to show you how I plan. Now, there's a video here I'm going to show you, but it tells you a lot of ideas for outdoor learning, but I don't want you really to take the ideas, although obviously you can have them. What I want you to identify is how I'm coming up with the ideas. So what I do is I walk around the location where I'm going to teach, and I look for inspiration, and I think, right, how can I teach that learning objective? Because I've got to have that in my brain first. How am I going to teach that? That location there has got this. This is really going to help me teach that. Okay. And if I can't go to the location, I actually visualize it, because I know these locations very well. I just visualize it, walk through it. And as I'm walking through it, I think, right, that's the learning objective. Right. Okay, I could do that there. So I'm going to just put this on. This is about 13 minutes. Hopefully the sound is okay. If it isn't, when I send you it, I send you the original copy. So it's usually much better. So while you're watching this, you can think about what activities I'm doing, but I want you to see how I am coming up with them. This is literally me brainstorming. So I didn't script this. I just walked around and went, So there's a bit of ums in there. So enjoy.
Okay, for this video, what I'm going to do is just walk you through the planning process that I use. Now, I am teaching completely outside, so all I'm considering is how the outdoors is actually inspiring me to cover the content and the skills I've got in mind that I want my learners to actually achieve through this topic. So the topic I'm going to be focusing on is looking at my space or my place. So I'm just going to go through how I would undertake that planning process. And I do that by coming out in the environment and actually looking for inspiration here. Now, when you're starting a topic, of course, you need your learners to input on that. So taking them out, the first thing I'm thinking is to get them to be inspired by this space as well. So I'd go for an explorative walk and just observe how they interact with that space. Ask them some key questions, but get them to start thinking about this space as a place for learning. So we'd just take a walk around the locations, and I'd be prompting a few questions, but also observing how they're interacting with the space and thinking about what questions might be coming up. Once I've got their input, then I'm going to think about where I'm going to get my inspiration from. And previous to taking them out, I'm going to go on my own inspirational walk, and I'm going to see what captivates me and what provides me with some inspiration for coming up with ways to teach certain content and certain skills. And that's what I'm going to take you on today. I'm going to take you for my planning walk that I will be undertaking. Now, the first idea I have when I identified looking around this space is to think how this space actually makes them feel. So linking this into the health and wellbeing AOLE, they could look at surveying which part of the school grounds they like and which bits they don't like. And then from that data, we could create some bar graphs or some pictograms, and we could use emojis as well. We could look at turning this into a better way of presenting data by looking at the problems with the bar graphs and using this categorical data, and use this to move on to the use of maps to represent data. Then we could map the emotions using emojis at different locations. So we could drill down into the reasons why different areas create different emotions, and now how these emotions differ from others in their class. And they could follow this up in class, produce a mental map of perception. So if we color-coded a map of moods using a color scheme that they derive for each emotion, then this could feed into creating a piece of artwork depicting the perception of the space in an abstract piece of art. Next, they could start to build their own map out of natural materials that they'll find outside. So they create a representation of the school grounds using those natural materials. They can then transfer that onto a piece of paper, so they've got a visual representation of it, and use it to try and get partners to find locations in the school grounds. Based on that map that they've created, they can think about how accurate it is, and is there any way we can make it more accurate? And think about OS maps, maybe doing a comparison between the two and see what's different between them. So thinking about representation of landforms, have they thought about how they're going to put in things like hills, but also a key. So they've probably got a key if they've done it on the piece of paper. So what have they used for those items? And does it end up getting too busy when they're trying to draw complete perfect versions? Once they've worked out what are the problems with their map and how they can try and improve it, we're talking about accuracy now. So what's the main reason we have maps and why do we have maps? Looking at direction, position, and also distance. So then we start talking about scaling and accuracy in terms of, is that map actually to scale? And how do we make our map correct? We can then start to go inside and use a base map used from Google Earth just to get that proper scale map and draw in that base map, and then come outside with that base map and put in those landscape features that aren't possible to see on Google Earth or that are new to your area, and then drawing that on top of your map. And then you create a much more accurate to scale map, which again you can repeat in that activity to try and find those locations to make sure it's much more accurate than your previous map. You can then teach about scale if we haven't done that, or revisit scale. And a brilliant way of doing that is you looking at Google Earth and just zooming out and then working out how we can work out the scale of our maps. Once you've got that scaled base map, you can then create the scale of your map or calculate it by looking at some things. So you can either provide some scaffold for this or some differentiation. So for example, if you had a Google image of your school grounds that had a scale of 100 times what's on the ground, then that'd be quite easy to calculate. You could also scaffold learners by giving them some prompts such as, what is the size of the yard on the map? What is the size of the yard in real life? And then offer some obvious features such as the size of the field. So once they've got a scale, they can draw a scale line underneath the drawing. They can also write a ratio. That can then be evaluated or assessed by using that to create a treasure hunt, treasure trail for their partner. So they use that map to locate specific places where they've hidden something. Their partner then follows it. You can use directional language so they can follow instructions. They can look at direction in terms of north, south, east, west, or it can be directions turning left, 90 degrees turn to the right, clockwise, anti-clockwise turning. All that directional language you can bring in there. You can also lay some lines, some grid lines onto your map and start bringing in some coordinates or some grid referencing as well. Also then you can start doing another treasure hunt, finding locations of places using your grid references or your coordinates. So building up those mapping skills, but also you're building up a resource that you can then use again, or you can use it for another year group. Once the maps are perfect, we can use them to teach or revisit area, perimeter and shape. So on the map, they measure some areas and perimeters and identify some shapes, and then they check the answers by measuring it outside. Then reverse it, measure outside the area and perimeter of the yard and check against the map. Starting to go a bit further afield than the school grounds, we could come to this spot and start to look at perspective. What is the furthest thing you can see? Estimate the distance to that location. How can we check? So you could give out OS maps of the area, measuring the distance. We could also look at landscape drawing, looking at land use site types such as rural or urban land use, obviously depending on your area. And then we could look at some examples of landscape artists such as Kevin Williams, and looking at some of the colours that he used. And he's been told that he overuses the colour black. So we could think about the colours that you can use in the landscape pictures of him, but also compare it to maybe some of the colours we used in our mood mapping and deciding what black represents. So we're coming back to that health and well-being and emotional connection with that sense of place as well. We can also look at other landscape artists such as Gwilym Pritchard landscape drawing pictures, or we could look at Peter Prendergast, which does cubic style, and Cedric Lockwood Morris, who actually lived locally here in Sketty, and he focused on the detail of the plants and the flowers. The students could then create their own landscape portrait of this environment. So they can use within one of the artist's style or create their own style. This view is also really useful to think about changes to this space over time. Creating the atmosphere by getting students to sit here maybe and reading accounts of the school grounds being used by American soldiers in the war to billet them, and also accounts of children being evacuated to Gower. So if you read with the learners looking out at this view and point out the locations where the tents were and the road that the children coming from London would have been evacuated down really will bring it to life. We can then inside get the children to write a letter to an evacuee telling them all about Gower and why it's a great place to come and live. We could create a model of the space in the past along with our little bell tents here. And this could be a large-scale challenge, so it could be an independent challenge or working in groups. So they're researching old photos, looking at old maps and culminating in a presentation of what it's like in that time. So talking to the class and maybe taking them for a walk around the school grounds and pointing out where certain things would have been. And really try and use descriptive language to evoke the feeling of the time. What was it like with these American airmen living on this site here? If you've got trees that have been chopped down and you know when they were chopped down, it's great to use this as the going back in time tool. So if you know that this growth line here was 2021, then you can go back in time and find out what the school was like or your grounds were like when this tree was a sapling in this year here. So this is a great resource if you've got a stump that you know when it was actually chopped down. And trying to write a narrative of what it was like to be this tree and go through its whole life and how the landscape around it changed while it was growing up. Back in time further, we can explain the landforms we've got. So why is this hill in the background? Kevin Bryn here. What rock type does it have? Doing a hunt around the school grounds to see if we can find any of the underlying rocks. Then when we do find what's underneath our feet, we could then sort it, categorize it, name it, draw the different rock types, and then that will leave us really nicely into a field trip up onto Kevin Bryn to see the landscape from close up. So again, we could walk from school or we could get a bus, but we can use that journey to revisit and assess our map use, following the map and estimating difference. Once we're on the hill, we can look at contour lines and playing games like Eagle Eye to see how the difference in contours makes it difficult to be seen from the highest point. We could go on a rock hunt, so we'll look in detail at the different rocks, visit King Arthur's Stone and hear about the legends of the stone, looking at the rock type and the geology maps to determine where the rocks from King Arthur's Stone came from. Sketch the rock, do some rubbings to see the difference between the textures, looking at shadow and how you can use that to create 3D images. Then we can collect rock samples out on the field and bring them back to school, undertaking a science investigation into the hardness of the different rock types. So we could quartz and calcite by rubbing them with different materials. Then we can relate to the landforms we see and try and work out why these landforms are like this. And they can make their own conglomerate using mud and pebbles, and there's lots of practical things they can do with fossils and other stones as well. When we come back to school, we can then also look for any rocks. There's one over there. There we go, I can see one there. So we can see any rocks that might have been from the same place as King Arthur's Stone. How did they get here? Think about the journey of the rock, and that could be some creative writing, the story of the rocks in our school grounds. How did they get here? Were they brought by man? Have they been here for hundreds of years? Were they brought here on top of wooden rollers like they did in the Egyptian times? Or have they been brought here as erratics from glaciation? So again, it's just an imaginative activity to do using the landscape around you as a prompt. The outdoor space, of course, goes beyond your school grounds, so consider going for a local village walk. So again, you can see what questions arise as you walk around your local village or to your local area. See what prompts you can use. Think about what's happened in the past in those locations. Find clues in the names of the houses. For old industries or residents, look at what jobs there are today or the jobs there were in the past. Visit your post office or talk to the postmistress. You can do graphs of the building's use in the open space. You can look at local services and interesting buildings, see how they've changed over time. Look at old maps to see how the area's changed. Visit the graveyard to see names from local area. Is there any local names that are still in your class? You can do the maths of the average age of death in the past, or you can undertake an air pollution study by looking at the lichen on the gravestones and compare those to ones you found in your school grounds. Back in school, you could do a recount of the day, looking at the descriptive language and also the directions and how things have changed. You can put sketches together, you could put those photos together and start to do some animation. So to bring it all together in one big celebration, you could do a big scaled model of this place to provide that sense of space. You could do about the landforms, you could create them, you could also do the houses or the facilities, you could even do a cut through to show the geology underneath, and all that information that they've gathered either over time or at this moment in time brings it all together in this fantastic 3D model that you can then share with other people to show all that stuff that they've discovered in this one model. We could also get some other perspectives of that sense of space, get some local people to come in and to present to the children. So this is just me brainstorming as I've been walking around this school grounds. There's a load more we could go into. Obviously, there's some really obvious topics that make you really easy to plan outdoors if you're doing habitats, for example. But don't just be restricted to the obvious things. I could still go around this grounds and plan some activities for looking at something which is really not relevant to the outdoors as well at all. So we could be looking at Egyptians. Again, think about those stones that we had. How do we move those stones? Using the slope of the landscape to move materials up and down, imagining that it's a pyramid that we're making. So hopefully this is a very different way of planning, but this might give you some ideas of how to get some inspiration from your school grounds to do some outdoor learning and putting it into your planning.
Okay, right. So I hope that gave you a bit of insight into how my brain works really and how I plan my outdoor learning sessions. Now there is a longer version of that. I do go on a bit sometimes when I'm planning, which includes some other things. So the video I'll give you is actually a slightly longer one as well. But what I want you to see is how you can plan just from the outdoors and how you can inspire yourself. So the positives of this, of course, is that you are using the outdoors as a resource to inspire you to teach the curriculum content that you want to cover. And the environment is the driving force for the planning content, and it's not the other way around. And you really are engaging in the outdoors as a resource to inspire. So you're really making the best use of that. The negatives, of course, are the fact that you do really need to know the environment well, especially if you're actually not going to the site, you're visualizing that location, so you're not actually in school. And you do have to have quite a lot of outdoor learning ideas at your fingertips to be able to formulate a plan while you're out and about. And when you see something inspirational, you need to know, oh, I can do this here, not quick, I need to Google what I can do here. But again, what I want you to do is just take aspects of this approach and maybe take a walk around the school grounds while you're planning, and then go on to plan your planning sheet a bit later on, or undertake your planning out in your school grounds and just occasionally look up to get a bit of inspiration. So, you know, take what is going to be useful for you. The last method is, I think, the most difficult and the most brave method, but I think a lot of schools are kind of going this way. And some of you have already said aspects of this you are already doing. And this is by observing how the pupils experience the outdoors and then draw the planning from that. So basically you are letting your learners explore the outdoors area, and then you're just becoming observant to what attracts the children in the outdoors. And this helps, of course, with when we looked at one of the barriers being those distractions. Instead of looking them at as distractions, saying, well, what's attracting those learners? What do they want to know about that? So in doing this, you have to change from being a teacher to being a facilitator, but also an active participant in this experience. So you need to try and understand the value of the behavior and why they're doing certain things. And you need to guide the learning activities and try and see the learning within it. Now, it could be just that you do this as the start of a topic, to explore a topic, to see what questions arise from the learners. But again, it might be something you're trialing because your learners might need to kind of gain experience in this over a few sessions. The great thing is that it really allows the curriculum to follow the learners' interests, and your curriculum will be bespoke to your school grounds and your learners' interests, which is exactly what the new curriculum requires. It also allows learners to input into the planning, which of course is what you are doing, but it's a slightly different way. And those learners who may be less vocal indoors can have their input put in as well. The negative side is that you really need to be quite brave and trust your learners, and they have to be interested in what's going on outside. If they don't know how to engage in the outdoors, it's going to be very difficult. You also have to be aware of what skills and what curriculum content you want to cover, and also have some ideas of how the outdoors can be used to cover that content and the skill. So there may be some aspects of the curriculum which just are too difficult to cover in this way. So this may be just an aspect of it. Right, so those are the different ways I've thought might be useful for you. I'm just going to stop sharing, because what I want you to have a bit of time for now is to discuss with each other what from those ideas you can take with you and put into your planning and adapt your planning to help you integrate and embed outdoor learning into your planning. Okay, so I'm going to put you into some breakout rooms. Introduce each other and just say what you use at the moment in terms of your planning, and then think about those 5 different methods and just talk to each other and discuss what you're going to take from these and put into your planning, what shouts to you as a really good idea and what you think you might want to integrate. Okay, welcome back. Well, hopefully that's given you some ideas for how to use that information, but also helping each other to give you ideas across different cross phases or across different schools as well. So if there's anyone want to feedback anything that they found, anything they want to share with other people.
I can just say, sorry, John, it's Rachel here. That was brilliant talking to Michelle. Really lovely ideas. So I've nicked loads of them. Thank you.
Brilliant. That's what I like to hear.
I apologise, Michelle, because I wasn't able to give you any ideas, but thank you for yours.
Good to share. Good to share. Oh, that's brilliant. Right. So I haven't got much more to go through, but what I want to go through is, first of all, just a bit about unplanned activities. So the fact that you may have things, and people were saying that in some of the breakout rooms, that the students go in a different direction, and you can suddenly, again, as long as you can see the learning within that. What I hope with the new curriculum is that you don't feel constrained by the learning objectives that you have, that you go outside and you think, right, this is what I'm planning to do, and you go out and suddenly it goes off on a tangent and there's something that's of real interest to students, and you can go with that. And then when you come back, you almost hindsight go, right, actually, this was the learning objective based on what we saw. And I'm hoping with the new curriculum, there's much less emphasis on putting the learning objectives at the top of the page, and then you complete that, and then you evaluate whether you met your learning objective, because it's much more freer, this form of planning and going with the students' interests. So I don't see how they can sit strictly with your learning objectives if you're not being adaptable. But we don't know until Eston start to inspect. So I'm just going to share my screen just to give you some ideas of unplanned events. So as I said, I work outdoors, and these are just a few examples of my unplanned experiences that I've had. So we were out on a field trip in Oxwich, and we suddenly found an injured hedgehog, and we had to take it to the hospital. Obviously I had to do that after the event, but the learning outcomes from that were not something I planned for. And what they found out and what they then carried on to do in school was more about that than about anything else we did on the field trip. But that's brilliant. That's exactly what we want. Also, the stuff that I get washed up on the strand lines, I quite often find sharks, etc. And although we're probably there looking at the beach, so it is all relevant, sometimes it isn't. An example I'll give you, I was taking a group out and we were doing the weather on the beach. But when I arrived, I found out that there was a dead minke whale washed up. And there is no way that I can possibly make that relevant to the weather. But I said to the teachers, I said, look, the chances of them ever seeing this again is 0. So please, can we go and see this minke whale? So we walked out and we went and saw it. And they were actually just about to do a post-mortem, which unfortunately we couldn't stay and watch. But I go back to that school quite often, and there's sixth form. It's a whole school from primary all the way up to sixth form, and sixth form students from that field trip always come up to me and say, oh yeah, do you remember that whale? So the impact of these unplanned learning experiences can be huge. So if we can plan spontaneity, then great. In terms of when the weather's nice, we'll go out and I've got some things I can take off the shelf, but also go with the flow and try to see the learning opportunities. It's something that you'll gain in skill, in time. So the more you do outdoor learning, the better you'll get at it. When we're talking about our short-term planning, so whether you're weekly planning or a daily planning, then there's just a couple of questions I think it's easy to ask to make sure that you're kind of focused. So what you really need to do, as I've said before, will you be able to achieve the desired learning outcome by going outside? And if you can't, then stay inside or go wherever else is a better place to go. So you've got to focus on that before you even think about the activity. So if the learning outcome is such a complex one that you need your students really focused in, they need to be sitting still, they need certain things that just don't work outside, then obviously that makes sense to stay inside. But also think about what you use inside. Yes, we're using an outdoor learning pedagogy, but you can also use all the other pedagogies outside as well. So think about what themes or approaches that work well indoors that you can then extend outdoors. So I've talked about this before, about all the skills that you have and how transferable they are to the outside. So again, if you're finding that a planning process is which is prompting you to add DCF to your planning, then use that, but with an outdoor learning focus. Just try and use what you've got. Try not to reinvent the wheel. So what I'm going to go through now is short-term planning. So you're planning an outdoor session. Now, this could be a half day. I wouldn't probably go through all this effort for just a little part of your lesson. So if you're just going out to collect data, I probably wouldn't go to all this effort. But just what I would put into a lesson plan, if you were writing a lesson plan, which was wholly outdoor learning or outdoor learning focused. Okay, so these are the main aspects that I would put in. Now, a lot of those are probably already in your planning, your short-term planning anyway. But again, if there's anything in there that you can just pull out and put into your short-term planning, it will just help you to make sure that it's relevant or makes sense in the outdoors as well. So obviously a learning objective. Now, if I show you a outdoor planning sheet that I've created, so this is an outdoor learning pro forma for an outdoor learning lesson. So at the top, we need to know why we're going outside. What are we trying to achieve? And of course, this can be adaptable. This could be changed when you go outside, but initially you did need to know why you're going out there. We need to know about what we're trying to cover, the AOLE, the focus, the purposes, what the matter statements, what curricular skills, the integral skills, everything from the curriculum. We need to bring that in as well. But then really importantly, right in the middle, your location. Where are you doing this? Are you going to be in the woods? Are you going to be in the yard? Are you going to be on the grass? Or are you going to be in the whole school grounds and give them all of that space? You need to know where you're coming from. So what's the prior learning that's taken place in school that then is relating to what you're going to learn outside? And then we're talking about the actual outline of the lesson itself. So the preparation could be preparing your class to do this activity. It could be done inside. It could be done outside at your muster point. So again, think about the location for that preparation for the task. And then think about those things we went through when we looked at starting out. Where is your muster point? What transition exercise are you doing? And then your main activity. So what you're actually going to undertake in terms of the activity and what learning styles are you going to include? So what pedagogies? So again, take what you use inside, what works there, take it outside. Your supervision style. So what's your role in all this? Are you going to be just observing and facilitating the learning? So they're going to be independent. Are you going to be looking out for opportunities of assessment of learning so that you can ask and say the right questions to bring the learners on? What's your role as a TA or your TA's role? And again, what assessment for learning are you creating so that you can then bring that back into the classroom or bring that to the next session and use that and build on that to ensure progression? Plenary, again, this is your normal outline of a lesson. And then what follow-up work are you doing back in class? Really importantly, that's not standalone what you did outside. We're building on what we did inside in our pre-session work. We're then building on what we did outside with our post-session work. So it all comes together. And then your post-session work might end up being the pre-session work for your next outdoor activity. So it all comes together in a nice cycle. Differentiation, how are you going to move your learners on from progression steps? And mainly the best way of doing this outdoors is some kind of key questions. So what questions can you ask to really push them or to support them and scaffold them? And also, what new questions can you see if they finish that activity? Right, how can we bring them up to the next level? What's the next question I need to ask them to either adapt their learning or to get them to start discovering the next skill that I want to build on in this progression step? And then thinking about what happens next. Now, if you've got another activity you've got planned, then you need to bridge that. And how are you going to do that? Do you need to come back inside? Or do you need to have a challenge in there to test the things that you've taught them in class? Are we talking about assessment of knowledge or assessment of understanding of concepts? Or are you testing their skills in something else? And then how the learners can move themselves on, so how they can be independent. And then really importantly, at the bottom, you need to evaluate that session. Now, I know it's really frustrating evaluating every lesson, but it's really important when you're starting out with outdoor learning, because you need to work out, are your learning objectives something that you could achieve? Did you go off piste? Did you have to adapt your lesson plan? And if so, why? Was it because of the outdoors? Was it because your skills of your learners are not where you thought they would be? Is there something outdoors that is restricting or improving the learning so that you went further than you thought? Are you having issues in terms of accessing certain things outside because of the weather, the resources, the location, the concentration of your students, the number of students? So trying to drill down as to what's making this a good session or a bad session. And then you can then build on that next time. And really importantly, any unplanned learning that took place that you hadn't predicted and then just went off on a tangent. And then you can then use that to plan your post outdoor learning session inside. So you're building on what they learned, not what you hoped they learned through your activity. And you're going with your learners' interests as well then as well. So hopefully that will be useful for you. And then the last thing I'm going to go through is just a really quick one, because we're going to go through this much more in our next session, is how to make your planning go beyond your planning. I mean, beyond your individual planning as a teacher and more as a school. So we're going to do this more next session, as I said, but trying to make it part of your routine is really useful to make sure that you've got that continuous input into your planning. Now, a lot of schools do this Muddy Monday or Welly Wednesday, and that is a really simple way to ensure that the outdoors is happening regularly. It also helps you to train your students, and it trains your parents because they know they always go out. And it also, it moves away from the idea that outdoors is just for early years, because if your whole school is doing it, then it's for Key Stage 2 as well. And also it's not just outdoors for PE. We get changed to go out for other subjects as well. So it breaks down some of those barriers. And it also shows that it's suitable for all age groups, because you're embedding it across all year groups. And it's something that when they move year groups, they are used to. So you're training them to go out. Just be aware that you should still be embedding the learning you're doing in these sessions. Don't just, again, put in your planning, oh, we go out Welly Wednesday, we've done outdoor learning. What are you doing out there, and how does that link into the curriculum content you want to cover? A really nice idea, which I built on over lockdown, which was using outdoor learning for your homework or home learning. Now, over lockdown, because I couldn't do my field trips, I went online and did a YouTube channel, and I set out challenges, daily challenges for you to use outdoors to teach all aspects of the curriculum, using the children's gardens. So those are all on YouTube. So if you want to look at those, if you just search #Nature Days, you'll find them there. And if you could build that into your homework schedule, I'm sure that lots of your learners would really like to do that homework as opposed to some of the other stuff. So It's an opportunity to provide that homeschool link so that people explore their outdoor area. You don't need anything brilliant to do these, no resources, not a brilliant yard. It's just an outdoor space that you can get to. Find experts inside your school. So I said before about local experts coming in, about local history, but also think about your parents. You know, hopefully you send out questionnaires asking them if they've got any skills. But if you can find out any ones that are interested in the outdoors, if they're gardeners and they want to set up a gardening club and anything like that, so you'll be amazed how much talent you'll find within your families. And, you know, you've got grandparents out there, or, you know, school community, anyone that you can get in, invite these volunteers into your school, and they can hold talks or clubs. And of course, if you can't do it because of COVID, you can do interviews on Zoom. Also, a really important thing, which again, we've got another whole session on, is that outdoor learning could also be included in what we call learning outside the classroom. So it's not just what you do in your local space, your grounds and your local learning area. It's going further afield, field trips, visits, and getting visitors in as well. So bringing them in is really key to making it relevant, because especially if they're your learners' parents, but it also brings it alive a lot as well. So tap into all that expertise. And also you can get resources from a lot of people as well. If you've got somebody who, I heard somebody say somebody worked in a furniture place. If you've got learners, parents who've got excess resources that they want to donate to the school, you won't know unless you ask them, but there's no harm in asking at all. And then setting the culture for outdoor learning and nature-based as a non-negotiable. So it's very easy to not do it because it's wet, but if you set your learners up to expect it not to happen when it's raining, then they're not going to bring their stuff when it's raining. So ensure that it is an integral part of your school life. And the way to do that is to embed it into your planning and also put it into your whole school learning outside policy, which again, we'll look at next time. But setting the culture and setting the attitude of the teachers and the learners is key to making sure that you are continuing with it regardless of the weather. And then the last thing is to deeply embed outdoor learning into your school. So we're not talking about you being the expert in outdoor learning because you've come on this course, because what happens, and it's happened in a lot of schools and happened with all the forest school, they had their forest school teachers, they got trained up and they were doing brilliant forest school, and then that teacher left and suddenly it all fell apart because that was the teacher that did it. So if you're deeply embedding this outdoor learning across the school with every member of staff engaged and actually doing it, then you're going to survive the shifting things in the school, the head teacher leaving, your staff leading, political boundaries changing, budgets changing, management system changing, curriculums changing. If it's embedded deeply, then it will take place because everybody is actually buying into it. It's not just one or two members of staff. Okay, so if the outdoor learning is going to be a success, hopefully this is what you gained from this presentation, it really can't be just a bolt-on to your existing lessons. You really need to use nature as a way of delivering your existing curriculum rather than creating more work to do. So use it as a resource and make it an integral part of the school day. It's the only way to make it a real genuine success. Right, last slide. Now, homework. This is for you to do. Now, you've already been talking about it, so it shouldn't be hard at all. What I want you to do, and again, if you look at the Padlet, which I've got online, which I will share with you as well when I send the presentation, it's on the last slide. This has all the information. It's also got that lesson plan for an outdoor learning session on it. So basically all I want you to do is look at your learn term, medium term, short term planning and come up with a way to adapt it so that you can have a greater emphasis on outdoor learning. So hopefully that is basically going to put everything together that you've seen today. And that is it. So, 2 minutes nearly. So if I stop sharing this, so this is the Padlet here. If I can share that, so I can show you the Padlet. So this is available for you to all look at. And if you look at the first column, you'll see it will have the next homework in here. but all this is just resources online that you can help yourself to and have a look. And hopefully that will provide you with a base for your outdoor learning ideas. Right, so before you go, has anybody got any questions? No, right, well, fantastic. So the next session is on the 1st of December, so in 2 weeks' time, and we're going to be looking at that systematic changes to embed outdoor learning across the school. So I'm going to be showing you how to create an outdoor learning policy and how to try and get senior management to buy in, and also trying to make sure this is something that is, you know, non-negotiable and continuous with your school, with all members of staff, not just the enthusiastic ones. So I hope to see some, if not all of you, next time. Oh, and yes, please do fill in the feedback form, which again will be at the end of the presentation. So if you've got any comments that you can say, will really help me. I know some of you have been doing it, but if you haven't done it for the other ones, I'm actually changing it every time. So if you have come for another one and you fill it in for that session, if you could please fill it in again, because I'm adding questions to it to help me build the next session. So if you have actually completed it and think, oh, I've done that before, please can you do it again so that I can actually see what the answers to that one, those questions are. So I'll put it in the chat so you can just click on that if you want to go straight to. So if there's no more questions, I will leave you to it. Have a lovely couple of weeks and hopefully see you on the 1st. Goodbye.